Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight we'll be discussing fraud and economic crimes in Rwanda and what is being done by relevant institutions to combat it. According to the 2018 Global Economic Crime and Fraud Survey Rwanda report, the top 4 economic crimes in the country as we speak are asset misappropriation, cybercrime, business misconduct, and bribery and corruption. Tonight, this is what we're going to talk about, and my name is Dana Mpisi. I'm part of The Square. I'm joined here by my fellow resident panelists, Brennan Namata. Thank you. Great to have you here. Ephraim and Charles.
Thank you for having me.
Always. How are you, Dana?
Good.
Always. I wasn't here last week.
Yes, yeah. We missed you.
We missed you.
I missed you guys too. I took my maiden voyage to Lusaka, and yes. Very, very interesting place to lots of opportunities, and the Rwandese community there are quite diverse, I must say. Yes.
Good stuff. Good. Well, glad to have you back, Charles. And joining us tonight here, thank you for honoring our invitation, is the Director General at the Rwanda Investigative Bureau in charge of criminal investigations, Mr. Jean-Marie Twagirayezu. Thank you very much for joining us here on The Square.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. So these are some of the things we're going to talk about. As always, as we always do on The Square, we're going to take a deep dive into the week that has been. It's just been 3 days, but I'm going to ask my fellow resident panelists for their key highlights this week so far. Charles, I'll start with you since you're not here last week.
Mine has nothing to do with why I wasn't here last week. Yes. So today there is a lady, she's the world number 38. In the women tennis ranking. She's a French lady, she's called Alizé. She undressed on court, not undressing like stripping, she changed her top. And she was called by the umpire for a code, it's like, you know, a yellow carding in the equivalent of football. And the World Tennis, the Women's Tennis Association was like, if Rafael Nadal can change his top, why can't a woman change her top? But she had already, you know, lost her demerit points. Unfortunately, she went ahead to lose that particular match and not progress to the next stage. And it's been a big talk. If you asked me, she had her back to the camera, and you know, you play long matches of tennis, and you have to change the top. If you ask me the reason, I think she wanted to advertise whatever was underneath the top, and the designer got a bit of mileage out of it. But I think we're yet to see more. I think it was the first time to see a woman undress at the US Open or any other tennis federation. It was quite big.
But don't you think those are double standards? While we're at it, if Nadal can do that, or you know, change their t-shirts on the court, quickly get into another t-shirt and continue playing, you know, it's lots of sweat, it's discomfort. She goes to the corner, does it with a certain degree of...
Well, she didn't actually go to the corner. She went to the baseline where the ball boys or the ball girls are and had her back. I want to assume that the person who was in front of her was a girl. Had her back, had her front to the ball boy or ball whatever, and took off her top and put on another top. So the bit of it, can you imagine what was going on in the eyes of the entire audience? It's unfortunate. I know we've had a lot of feminism talk, and Bana might go on and on about this. But seeing a man's back and seeing a woman's back are two totally different things.
What do you mean totally different things?
Anyway, another topic for the sure. Ephraim, what's your highlights of the week so far?
What's the highlights of the week? There's so many things. I think one is, this is more international. The UK Prime Minister has been, as the media has put it, trying to woo African leaders. She's in South Africa, or was in South Africa. And people are like, she's trying to establish, at least establish a foothold in the light of Brexit. I find it very interesting. I genuinely find it very interesting that you have Western powers, when they fall out of favor with one another, they turn to Africa. I don't know what we are, whether we are a negotiation tip or, but it's interesting. So for me, that was an interesting highlight, and also that's in the wake of what's happening with Trump and his legal issues and the trade wars and the midterms in the U.S. So For me, my week was quite interesting in relation to global politics.
Interesting. Brenna?
Several things. One, I am celebrating today because of the news coming out of Rwanda Education Board. Finally,
certificates.
Yes, certificates for secondary students. I mean, most of them have been denied opportunities, scholarships, just because certificates are printed somewhere, as far as UK. So that's a major milestone. Two, Reon Sport. As I was coming in, I saw the news, yes. You know, they've done us very proud. Congratulations to all Reon fans.
What have they done?
Qualification.
Okay. Yes, they qualified.
Yes, they did beat Tanzania, and for a team that...
yes, the young nation, young Africans.
I think it's one of those teams that is quite interesting. There's no doubt that they have a strong following in Rwanda, but to see them emerge and now on continental level, so I'm happy for that. Thirdly, the investment statistics out of RDB are quite impressive. I haven't really looked at the details of the report, but it would be interesting to see what the technical people call vertical spillovers. If we are attracting investment, what is the link in terms of boosting our local capacity and also job creation?
I think just to add to that, interesting if you look at the report, how much of it is local investment. It's something that people don't talk about enough, that Rwandans still remain the biggest investors in our country, or at least one of the largest investors in our country, and it's good to know. I mean, and it's something that we should celebrate because it would and should encourage other business people that, look, your fellow Rwandan is also investing in the country. It's not just the job of some investor from Portugal or from the UK or Europe or the US. It's you as Rwandan can also, with whatever resources you have, can invest in your country and actually be one of the largest investors in the country.
I agree. Would you also like to share anything that has caught your particular attention this week so far?
Yeah, I think mine is a very interesting topic, as you can see. Mine is about combating fraud, and I think I will share a lot of stuff while discussing on this topic.
Yes. Okay. So before we get into the questions, we're combating fraud and looking at economic crimes in the country. I would like to ask you, just for the sake of our audiences and as well for the sake of us on this panel, if you can just give us a brief introduction of Rwanda Investigative Bureau and the differentiation between RIB and the Rwanda National Police.
Thank you, Dana, for that good question. And I think, as you heard, with the establishment of the newly specialized organ, Rwanda Investigation Bureau, it is a new institution that was specifically established and mandated to deal with criminal investigations, whereas police, or Rwanda National Police, has much more broad mission, which is to protect people and their property, meaning dealing with security of people and their property. So there is a lot of difference. Rwanda Investigation Bureau is specifically focused on crime investigations, dealing with crimes, whereas police has a broader mandate of dealing with security issues, security of people and their properties.
And I think if I read correctly when the announcement was made, Rwanda Investigations Bureau is under the Ministry of Justice.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not under police.
It's not, it's a separate organ. It's an independent organ, specialized, specifically mandated to deal with crime.
Okay.
So while we're on the topic of crime, the first crime that I'd like us to start with is cybercrime. Cybercrime, as you know, is on the rise, especially attacking financial institutions in Rwanda. And my first question for you, and I'd like to also give an example to our audience, is to do with last year's case. There was a case of cybercrime in a local bank where fraudsters organized an electronic heist, which saw 900 million and above moved to fraudulent bank accounts. Of course, this movement was stopped in time with the Rwanda Investigative Bureau, working in tandem with the Central Bank of Rwanda. So my question for you, and the panel will ask their follow-up questions, is how prepared, how well equipped is the Rwanda Investigative Bureau? How well equipped is it to handle such cases of crime, cybercrime, especially directly affecting financial institutions in the country?
Thank you, Diana, for the good question. It is true, over the recent years, we have been recording or registering cases of cyber fraud affecting the financial sector, and fraudsters have been using highly sophisticated ways, and the modus operandi include mainly accessing and hacking bank systems, using fraudulent electronic money transfer, theft through ATM cards, debit cards, credit cards, hacking social media accounts of individuals, especially with intention to access victims' data with purpose to threaten some victims and even demand some money.
Is this the ransomware?
Sorry,
is that the ransomware?
Sorry?
Is this to do with ransomware? The okay.
It's sometimes they access data and they threaten people with the purpose to demand money, and there are a lot of malpractices that are involved in the cyber fraud. And as the Rwanda Investigation Bureau, as the newly established organ that is specifically mandated to deal with such crimes, is equipped with all the necessary means, tools, and capacity and capabilities to deal with such crimes. We are working on different strategies and programs with different institutions and stakeholders within the country. Specifically, we are building capacity and capabilities. We have already established a cyber center equipped with modern technologies, modern tools that are capable to detect and dismantle criminal networks. We are working with the other players in the financial sector, especially banks and the other financial institutions, to share, to enhance sharing of information so that people get to know what is happening and try to be prepared to deter future attacks. We are working with the public, especially we are conducting public awareness campaign programs to sensitize the public about these emerging crimes so that they are not trapped in these kind of crimes. And of course, with investigative capabilities, especially through the Cyber Center, we are able to detect and even correct necessary evidence to support investigations and prosecute suspects before the courts of law. And this contributes greatly to future deterrence. Basically, those are the strategies that you are working on currently with other players involved.
I remember you mentioned the story of ransomware. I remember the story of, I think this was a young gentleman, I think from the east, who had taken over...
From the east part of Rwanda? Or
Rwanda. Eastern Rwanda. I'm not sure if it was the east, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. This is a young man, he took over accounts of celebrities, some celebrities in Rwanda, and I don't know if it was just him or he had some colleagues who he was working with, but still young men. And they took over these accounts of these celebrities, the social media accounts, and then they threatened them. They said, we are going to expose what you have in your inboxes, etc. We're not going to hand them over. We're going to post this. We're going to post that unless you give us money. The guys are like, how much? I think each, if I remember the story correctly, I think each celebrity was asked to foot 200K, and they're told to send it via mobile money. Now, it would have, quote unquote, been an effective crime if they're not asked to send the money via mobile money. And I think a lot of people were, were amused at the case. Granted, crime is not right, but I think what people were asking, the question that people were asking is, these young people have these skills. These young people are probably seated idle somewhere. And I think always the question is, especially, and I know RIB probably is not the best person to address this, but in cases where prevention can start way before, you know, do we have systems in place to kind of spot situations like this? So idle young people with skills who are underemployed or unemployed, and it being a source of risk when it comes to committing some of these crimes, especially around cybercrime. So for me, the question is, when we look at some of these other aspects, do we actually see them for what they are, as potential risks from where crimes can, or at least criminals can originate?
So you're asking our guest if the elements of early detection in sort of if these crimes, is that something that RIB...
Maybe before Afande Jean-Marie comes in, I think and you raise an extremely pertinent point, Ephraim, around the preparedness of RIB. You know, the criminal mind never goes to sleep. And when you look at some of these things, and taking an example of the banking fraud that involved in excess of 900 million, we would never have known about this hadn't the media leaked that there's somebody in prison who is suspected of having caused the bank a loss of up to 900 million. Well, immediately, prosecution and RIB and police, so all of them combined, and the entire PR mechanism of whoever was in that setup was quick to say, no, money was not lost. We found, we arrested.
We stopped this before it happened.
Yes. I am unreliably informed that the story goes that there's some money that had already gone.
Yeah.
But we were very quick to cover up that no, don't look at how much money went or whether any money went, but we have the person. And therefore, my question to Afande Jean-Marie is a little bit different. Is that my interpretation of that circumstance, and I'll give you a few other examples later, is that we are quick to address a problem because we have arrested the culprit, but we have not gone to the root. So we are cutting the tree by the stem,
but it's the tree still.
But the tree can still grow because the root is still in the ground, and that's what causes me extreme concern.
So and what you're both saying to the Afande is more or less early detection.
Yes.
Is that something that we're equipped with?
Thank you for those good questions you are raising. And as I said earlier, prevention is one of the core functions of this newly established institution, Rwanda Investigation Bureau. We really give priority to prevention. And when it comes to prevention, as I said, we engage different partners, different stakeholders in different programs and strategies. As I said, we have awareness campaign programs that are meant and designed to engage people to get to know what is happening and how they can put in place all the necessary strategies to prevent, to see the gaps, to see the weaknesses in their own systems and how they can seal those gaps. And in as far as prevention is concerned, we also need to have the capacity and capabilities that facilitate to detect, to have prior detection. And you try to deal with instances or cases that are being detected before you get involved in handling damages. So, and that's how we are able even to deter and block some cyber attacks. If we wouldn't have those capabilities, those preventive and the protective capabilities, we wouldn't be able to repel the cyber attack that was affecting one of the banks, and we were able even to repel some attacks and recover some money. Those are the preventive measures.
Keyword being some money.
Yeah. Yes.
I think an interesting statistic is that a significant portion of some of these crimes are committed by internal people.
Especially middle management.
Especially middle management. And I find that very interesting, coming back to these preventative measures, because again, we all know prevention is better than cure. And it's obviously cheaper to prevent than it is to cure an issue. When it comes down to how we vet, there's a case I recently had. I had a friend who was going to get a blood test done. They wanted to, I think they were supposed to get something related to school, so they went to do a blood test. They were not asked for the ID. Then the assumption could be, even when they went to get the blood test, in other countries, they literally strip you. You leave everything at the door and you enter so that you're not carrying anybody else's blood. And this is for a drug test. And I say this because that somebody could go for a drug test for employment, right, and get the job. And there are no stringent elements to ensure there's an efficient background check done. Now, when you look at some of these organizations, even when we talk about this local bank, if I'm not wrong, with this local bank, one of the culprits was the head of ICT in the bank. A head of ICT or somebody in ICT, a senior official.
I think it's difficult for you to have a bank fraud without an insider.
Exactly. Now, imagine this is the head of ICT. What kind of background check was done to ensure that this individual does not have criminal elements? And somebody could say, but we didn't see it or we didn't spot it. And I could maybe ask, how does RIB partner with some of these institutions to ensure that when they do bring staff in, they have done the necessary background checks to ensure that they've uncovered every single issue and turned every stone to ensure that they truly know who they are bringing on board?
Thank you for that good question. And RIB, working together with the other security and the other relevant organs, we are able to involve all affected institutions, and they make their own assessment, their own security assessment, and they find where they have gaps and how they can deal with those gaps. And some of the areas that are very crucial in this is one of those areas you are mentioning, vetting the staff, vetting the people who are accessing their systems, and they can do with those programs, those measures in place. They are able to build their own internal systems that are able to ensure those vetting, and where necessary, they can even seek more support from other relevant institutions and make sure that they get to know the people they are dealing with and ensure security over their own systems.
Brina, yes?
I'd like to shift the discussion to, in terms of getting the work actually done, because it's one thing to have good policy in terms of on paper, have measures, but in actual implementation. Now, looking at the secrecy with which you deal with these crimes, my colleagues already pointed out the difficulty of even identifying what actually happened, because we sort of work backwards. After this thing has probably been leaked to the media, then we get to know what actually happened. So the issue of transparency, to what extent do you see it as important in terms of what you do? And the reason I ask this is because you'll find that the more you don't disclose what is actually involved, it means more people are vulnerable. It means more people don't know what to do. For instance, we don't know how the attack actually happened. How am I supposed to prevent myself if I don't know this is what actually transpired?
Yeah, thank you. As you rightly said, we need to balance the two interests. As we are pursuing the justice interest, which comes with those values and principles, maintaining secrecy. We need also to protect the people, giving the necessary information for them to protect themselves, and this is what we are doing. This is why we are here. Yes. This is why we are communicating. We are sharing with the public what is happening and try to get involved all people so that they get to know and how they can contribute to put in place and implement corrective strategies that are here to deal with such crimes that are affecting people. And on the other hand, we need to maintain secrecy of investigations and for effective justice.
So which one takes precedence?
Investigation. Until investigations will be...
You know, for you a trader, you're a sugar trader. So let's ask the investigator. Which one would you, on the weighing scale, which one would you give more importance?
All those two aspects are very equally important. And we need to consider all those aspects when we are dealing with these crimes. And protecting people is very important and equally important as protecting people who are involved in the justice process.
So
let me wonder.
No, just one second,
yes.
Bana. Afande, would you wonder that, would you rather that one criminal is probably he gets away with it than 1 million people being not being exposed of their money being stolen from the bank? Or you would rather that you get that one criminal and get him locked away for 5 years?
Remember, as you are dealing with one criminal, we are also protecting a lot of people behind the criminal networks. So you need to balance all those interests.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and more specifically for institutions, corporate institutions, you know, there's a lot of exposure if you're talking about fraud. So I can understand why there's a bit of secrecy. But in terms of, let's say it's now done, yeah, what kind of campaigns do you run and say, you don't have to give the specifics, but sort of say, we have had a case of fraud, A, B, C, D, you can come up with, you know, but pointing at how it has been done. So far, I haven't seen that. What we usually see is just the media reporting what they've been told actually transpired. But, you know, a thorough kind of report that gives pointers so that if I read, I know that the next time I meet, you know, a fraudster, this is what I should do, or this is how I should deal with them. That's one side of it. Now, in terms of economic crimes, I don't know how you describe or what is the scope for economic crimes, because maybe you want to respond to that. And the reason I'm asking that is because when we look at economic crimes, it goes beyond just fraud. How do you account for public projects, for instance, where you have lots of money invested in a project that never actually comes to fruit? You know, for instance, we have a case, everyone knows about it, you know, pension money invested in a project. And how do you, so in terms of your investigations, economic crimes, if you could just give us a scope, how do you define economic crimes? Because for me, if you ask me as someone who is contributing to the pension fund, if the pension fund is failing to make good investments, for me it would be a crime because I'm losing my pension.
Especially where there is negligence and misappropriation.
So can you give us a brief scope of how RAB defines economic crimes?
Yeah, economic crimes are those crimes that are affecting both individual property and collective economy. And there are a variety of crimes ranging from embezzlement, corruption. Those are crimes that are affecting a global economy.
Abuse of office.
Abuse of office. And there are also other crimes that are affecting specifically properties of people, including bouncing checks, frauds, misappropriation, all those stuff that are affecting the ownership of property by individuals.
Thank you very much. Ephraim, we need to go for the break, but we'll get back to you. And as you're saying, especially talking about property and people's livelihoods, we're going to talk about fraudulent auctioning. So stay with us. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to The Square. Tonight we are discussing economic crimes in Rwanda and looking at how we can combat fraud with the relevant institutions in the country. We are joined here with Director General of Criminal Investigations from Rwanda Investigative Bureau, Mr. Jean-Marie Twagireyesu. So the next thing that we'd like to touch upon is fraudulent auctioning. This is another economic crime that's in the rise in the country. So there have been numerous complaints on how properties are undervalued and sold at giveaway prices. And this, I want to give a recent case of the petrol station that was valued at around 850 million, but was actually bought at around 330 million. Based on this practice. If you can share with us how this network of fraudulent auctioneers, how big it spans, and what RIB is doing to actually dismantle this particular network, because it's been on the rise recently.
Thank you for another good question. And it is true, this year we have been receiving cases or complaints of fraudulent auctioning. And basically, public auctions are conducted with involvement of different parties, including the auctioning institution, such as banks, and auctioning agents, including receivers, brokers, and bidders. And we have been identifying irregularities and malpractices in these auctioning processes. And we have basically identified 3 types or forms of irregularities involved in these auctioning processes. First, we are observing receivers who are conniving with defense lawyers and making non-genuine reports to RDB just to favor some bidders of their choice, and of course in a way that is affecting the owners of property. Secondly, we have been observing creeks or networks of unregistered brokers who get primary information from various sources, including the banks, and then they share or they give this information, they pass the information to a potential bidder, promising support through disguising as potential bidders with the purpose to eliminate genuine bidders. And during the auctioning process, they tend to compete, raising prices, setting high prices, and later on they fail to pay, claiming having not enough money, and ending up facilitating bidders of their choice. And of course, all this done in return of some payment they get from beneficiaries of those fraudulent auctioning. And in some other instances, we observe some experts, these people who are doing valuation of property, and they tend to under-evaluate the property in auction, and they give it low price, and this low price we reserve as a basis to facilitate some bidders to get the property at low price. Basically, those are the malpractices observed in these auctioning processes.
I think...
can Bernard say something?
Yes, I just wanted to take you back to
Yes,
when you started speaking, you mentioned the issue of prevention. Part of what you do is prevention. Now, listening to you, for instance, what is happening with the auctions, it's an ethical issue, you know, where you have people, professionals in the industry that fail to follow the rules and instead work against them. Now, in terms of prevention, how do you work with different institutions? And I'm talking about if it's the Bankers Association, for instance, if it's the Journalists Association, how do you ensure that they help you do your work? Because if they have, for instance, issued a certificate and said so-and-so is a valuer, yeah? If you are engaged in fraud, this is the punishment. In a way, that could help deter. But it seems like you have these standards bodies, but they're not doing much,
yes,
which, you know, gives you more work. So in terms of prevention, what are you doing about that?
Yeah, prevention is really done through two ways. One, first, we are engaging partners, especially those institutions that are involved in the auctioning process, especially financial institutions, RDB, land centers. Through information sharing, we get to know those people, those criminals who are involved in those auctioning networks. And once we detect them, we prosecute them. And by prosecution, it also serves as deterrence. It serves deterrence in the future. And we are also able to ensure prevention by sharing information to the public. And the public get to know, and they share information about these criminal networks. And we deploy for timely response. And in some instances, we are able even to detect and arrest or apprehend the suspects before they get involved. And to some extent, it also serves as prevention in future auctioning processes.
You know, you cannot talk about fraud and economic crimes without talking about banks and telecoms. And with banks, it's very easy for them to get away with it because we have been window dressing this issue of the 900 million and certain Nigerian national who appeared in papers and was locked up, and we are going to go past it. But the actual person who will lose is that person who has his deposit in the bank. And then you'll even take it a notch higher and talk about fraudulent auctions, and even talk about projects that are financed by banks. Like for the last 3-4 years, there's been this issue around Ujenge and Palm Estate and banks that were involved, a regional bank and an international bank. And at the end of the day, all that is going to happen is the banks will probably make the individuals who are responsible for that fraudulent act either lose their jobs, worst case scenario, get prosecuted. If they are caught on the wrong side of the law, will get locked up. But the person who actually loses is the ordinary mwananchi. And that is where, Afande, we are all talking about protection of that individual, of the person who actually loses. You earlier alluded to protecting property and protecting businesses. When you now move on to the telecom, it's actually even worse. There is a very common thing called SIM boxing, where a network will be somewhere, for argument's sake, Papua New Guinea, and they'll buy 100 SIM cards from 100 different telecom companies, and they will bypass a network. Me, seated here in Kigali, I will make a phone call to Venezuela, and either the Venezuela Telecom, neither the Venezuela Telecom nor MTN will benefit from that international phone call because somebody seated somewhere in Papua New Guinea has managed to bypass that network. So my specific question is, and please, Afande, don't take this too offensively, because I do not get the feeling that as the criminals think faster. You did allude to a capacity issue earlier on, that you're thinking or you're acting as fast enough. Elsewhere in the world, they are for lack of a better word, I think they are called positive hackers. Yes. At RIB, do you have the capacity? Do you have the in-house capacity to actually have these hackers, the people who can do that prevention? Can you stand here on your 2 feet and tell us that there is no sim boxing that can happen because we have our people? That we can actually detect that there is a deal that was done between two banks and the ordinary mwananchi lost money, but we know why that ordinary mwananchi lost money, and we are going to ensure that does not happen. So it's and it's also fine. We are a growing economy. We can appreciate that capacity needs to be built, and we can be patient. But we need to get confidence from yourself that there is something that is going to be done, that the ordinary mwananchi that does not continue losing money. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that good follow-up question. And so far we have arrested, we have detected and arrested suspects in connection with Simbox. And as you are aware, you have been following up these cases being handled and being prosecuted. And why we are able to detect them, it's because their capabilities. And as I said earlier, we are working with different stakeholders and players. We are working with telecoms, and in most cases, where all those Simbox fraudsters are involved in these acts, we are able to detect them and be able to prosecute them. That's why we can assure the public that the means and the capacity and the capabilities are there, with involvement of different partners. But the public has also to know that they have a role to play in this. They have to know how these things are happening and how they can share this information to all those relevant institutions, and they get involved for timely response.
I have a question. I want to follow up on Chelsea's question, because I was actually thinking of it earlier on in the show, and it's to do with the positive hackers. You know, some of these frauds and economic crimes, especially the ones committed by the consumers, so to speak, are done by relatively bright, very highly intelligent, highly qualified young people who are in most cases doing this because they're not employed, because of economic shortages in their livelihoods. So my question is, do you have a policy? And I know intelligence agencies do it abroad. You've seen it in movies where the CIA recruits a hacker, or the FBI gets a young university kid downloading stuff illegally just because of that expertise. Is this something, instead of putting them in jail and losing that sort of expertise or that resource, is there an element that RIB might consider, already employs, of rehabilitating these people and putting them under the employ to build their capacity?
Then I'll just supplement what you're saying, without taking out of the movies.
Yes.
Let's even take it in a Rwandan context.
Yes.
The RDF does it.
Yes.
They take very brainy resources, whether they are medical doctors or surgeons or engineers or flight engineers, whatever specialized technical skill they have. Recruit them in the army, take them for a very short cadet, and they come to serve the
yeah,
army.
but Charles,
so now, in the same breath...
Yeah, but
yeah.
me, I'm talking about
Yes.
reforming criminals. That's fine.
No, but you just said that they are criminals not out of choice.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
So they can be good to society.
Yes.
In the same breath, these people with their brains, if the guy has a brain to crack the MTN network, imagine what good he would do to the Rwanda Investigation Bureau.
So we're saying the same thing,
yes,
Charles.
Precisely,
so
yes,
if you can please answer that.
Thank you. Rwanda Investigation Bureau is not working in isolation. Remember, this is a criminal investigation body. It's part of the criminal justice process. And during the process, there are some other institutions that are involved in the process. We are the one who are handling the suspects, the criminals that if first instance, and in the process, during the process, we get to hand over the criminals to other institutions, including prosecution, including the courts and the prisons and the other rehabilitation agencies. And each institution has its own mandate, but they are where we need to meet. We share information about criminals. The background information that we obtain from the criminals we are handling is shared with other institutions that are involved in the process, and it serves to facilitate rehabilitation process.
But my question,
I think
question on and Charles, is because you interrupted my train of thought. But my question is there an element of rehabilitating these sort of criminals and putting them under the employ of RIB to build the capacity in terms of keeping up at the pace with this?
Actually, let me ask it in a different way. Yes. Would you consider going to prison,
picking some of the criminals,
sieving some of those clever criminals and employing them
under RIB?
Because those guys, if a criminal has been convicted for an extremely heinous crime, cyber crime, he might be of better use to you. So is that a potential recruitment ground? Is a prison a potential recruitment ground for the...
Rehabilitation is a process, and
yes.
it has its own rules and regulations. And before we go to take prisoners and get them back and employ them within the Rwanda Investigation Bureau, they has to pass through the rehabilitation process. And
of course.
If they went through the rehabilitation process, at some point they get to be integrated within the society. And
yes.
If they are integrated within the society like any other citizen, they have right to be employed, and I don't see anything that might prevent
Has it happened
RIB or Rwanda Investigation Bureau, even
is there one or
those
two
good
people
citizens
you have
who have been in jail and
yes.
rehabilitated
yes.
like any other good citizen.
Has it happened?
So far, this is a new institution.
Yes.
Yes.
It's 3 to 4 months old. We are yet to do with recruitment, so I don't think there is any case that has happened in that context.
Brenna, last question.
No, not a question. Just a recommendation and a comment. I think as a new institution, what I tend to see is for most agencies, there's a less budget for public communication and information. I think in this case, perhaps in part of your plans, there needs to be a big budget towards public awareness, around the nature of these crimes and what people can do to prevent themselves. Otherwise, you do the good work of just dealing with investigations, but not actually prevention.
I disagree, and this is what I wanted to say before the break.
Can you make your words short?
I'll make it very short.
Frankly
speaking, to a certain degree, and I say this with all respect for transparency, but certain things are not for the public's knowledge. And I say this not with us. No, I genuinely feel, I do believe there has to be an awareness and an education, but it has to be done with the people where the vulnerabilities exist. Then obviously the population can then be educated on how to spot things, but I don't think that requires a massive budget. I think it requires engaging them with the elements that already exist in society, and that's not an expensive.
Charles, very briefly, please.
Yes, again, me with my parting shots. I think in line with, and I want to take this burden away from RIB, from anyone else but ourselves as Rwandans.
Citizens.
As Rwandan citizens. I think we have one major problem amongst all of us. We are too much of a trusting society, and we are too exposed. I mean, you walk into an ATM machine and there's a guard sleeping there with his gun and or he's chilling there inside because it's raining outside, and you're comfortable to go in and punch in your ATM. We are so lax. We move around with open handbags. We move around with checkbooks in our glove boxes in cars that are not locked, and that makes the life of the people who are into policing or criminal investigations a lot harder, because we are too lax in our day-to-day lives. I think we are all guilty, generally speaking, of being too relaxed in the way we conduct our day-to-day businesses, and I think we need to wake up and realize that the criminal is not sleeping. Yes. Parting shots.
Director General, if you can give us just closing remarks on this particular topic we have detailed tonight, especially on behalf of Rwanda Investigative Bureau.
Thank you. I need first to acknowledge that we benefited from this opportunity that was given to us. We really thank you and the RBA for offering this opportunity to us to actually implement one of our programs, being prevention through awareness, and the awareness is done through this mechanism. And we take this opportunity also to thank the public and the other partners and the stakeholders who are involved in this business for their contribution and the support in combating crimes, including financial and cyber frauds. And we appeal them to keep engaging each other and make sure that we ensure collective effort in ensuring that we are combating these emerging crimes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our audiences. We only had time to talk about cybercrime, especially with financial institutions and fraudulent auctioning. Hopefully, this is a conversation we'll have again. It's very wide. Thank you very much for coming to our show.
Thank you.
It's very important that you're here on behalf of RIB, not even informing us, but informing our audiences about this particular issue. So we've come to the end of this particular program. Please stay with us online. This conversation is still happening on our Twitter feed, The Square RW. Hashtag The Square RW. It's a conversation will continue until the next show, so please keep your comments coming. We didn't have time to go to a social media feed, but please keep your comments coming. Until then, see you next week, and have a good night.